everyone! For anybody that doesn't know, I am on the journey, right, to trying to be a full-time professional mixing engineer. Many of you guys and girls watching this may be at that high level, but for those of you that are on the same journey as me, I thought I would share some techniques that I've stolen from other pro mixers that have helped me a lot. And there isn't going to be any audio examples because it's basically a thing where I'm going to kind of tell you about them and I want you to experiment with them in the DAW. Like for me, these kind of things are best applied when you kind of experiment with them yourself and you hear the effects with your own ears so you can decide whether it's something that you find handy or not. Right, so the first two tricks involve bass. The first trick I learned from Warren Hewitt, who I'm pretty sure picked it up from Tim Palmer. Or maybe Jack Douglas. I want to say Tim Palmer. Now, interestingly enough, I had Tim Palmer on the Working Audio Tools podcast that me and Ed Thorne have, and I forgot to ask him about it. I had a little note and I forgot all about it because I was too busy trying to take in his feedback. Yes, like Tim Palmer critiqued me and Ed's mixes, where, like, if anybody doesn't know, the Working Audio Tools podcast is all about me and Ed taking multi-tracks, like the same multi-tracks, and comparing our own mixes. And thankfully we had Tim on, and Tim gave us constructive feedback on both mixes, what he liked, what he didn't like. So yeah, I would definitely suggest that you listen to that. I'll leave a link in the description for you. But I'm getting sidetracked. So bass, right? This bass technique, and it's basically this technique is all about splitting your bass. Now, the reason that I split bass, and the reason that how I understand the reason why Warren and other people split their bass, is because you generally want to have clean low end, and a lot of the times when you're thinking about your bass mid-range, for it to kind of pop through the mix and kind of be audible through, again, shitty, kind of crappy phone speakers, like mono speakers and stuff like that, you need a bit of saturation, and you need to make it a little bit dirty and get that mid-range to kind of poke through. But the difficulty when you're kind of saturating bass is that you'll saturate the whole thing, which means you'll saturate your low end. And what you'll find is a lot of the times if you saturate your low end too much, it just kind of falls apart a little bit. It comes a little bit woolly, and you kind of lose the tightness of that low end. I was always taught, Paul, keep your low end clean and tight. A way you can do it is just by duplicating the bass. So if you have a DI bass, you would duplicate it, and you would filter out all the lows in one and filter out all the highs in another, and then you would be able to process them differently. So you can compress your low end separately from your mid-range. You could saturate your mid-range and add what you need to add to make that come out of the speakers, and without it affecting the low end tightness. Another way of doing it is that many people have seen, if they've got a DI and like a bass amp, they'll use the DI just for the lows. So they'll filter out all the highs and just use the DI for the low lows. And then the bass amp, they'll take out all the lows and just use that for the mid-range, and the kind of the distortion, the character, kind of help that kind of bass kind of come through the mix. Now, the way that I kind of do it in Studio One with the splitter tool is I basically have like the low end to about 400, and then from 400 all the way up to like 20k, that's what I'll saturate. Sometimes I'll bring it up again, I use my ears, but normally it's about the kind of mid-range starts from about 400 all the way up to 20k. And this brings me to tip number 2, which I picked up from Jason Joshua and a few other mixers as well. Now, this seems to be a modern thing where I've heard many mixes where they'll kind of widen the mid-range of the bass. So basically, you've got like your low end of your bass, mono, but you've got like the mid-range of the bass just slightly, we're not talking like really wide, but just kind of like out of the peripheral of the kick. So it's almost like the mid-range of the bass just kind of sits away and doesn't kind of clash with the mid-range, like the click of the kick. And I've seen some people that just use the effect on choruses. So if they want to make the chorus a little bit bigger, they'll simply split the bass, and then they'll kind of widen the mid-range of the bass just in the choruses. Now, in terms of what you use to do that, Jason uses a Waves plugin. I can't remember exactly which one it is. Me personally, I use the mono spread in stage 1 from Leapwing, which is a pretty expensive tool, but that's how we do it. I picked this up from Jack Joseph Puig. And again, it's basically like very loosely. I've basically taken something that I've read and then expanded on this. Now, I remember reading a Simmed on Simmed article with JGP, and he was talking about the Big Girls Don't Cry record from Fergie. So JGP was using Trans-X from Waves, and he was using it to kind of add in a little bit more kind of transient kind of detail to certain things. He would do it on the guitars. I think he would do it on different things. If he kind of felt that something needed to kind of just have a little bit more punch or just kind of stand out a little bit more and kind of give the record just a little bit more kind of feel, then he would manipulate Trans-X. Either way, I kind of just took that idea and then expanded on it. I've got this technique where, I don't know if anybody else does this, probably somebody does, but what I do is I think of how I could isolate transients, EQ them, and then clip them. And I basically, to me, it's a push and pull. So what I'm doing is I'm expanding the transients and then I'm pushing them down with a clipper. So what that means is that I'm able to isolate the transient parts of a source kind of based on their fundamental. Now I do this using split EQ. So what I'll do is I'll find the fundamental of, say, a kick and a snare. Now I only do this on kick and snare. So I'll find the fundamental of the kick or the snare. Now this is a parallel thing that I do. So this is like I duplicate the snare. I'll roll off all of the kind of low end. And then what I'll do is, what split EQ is great for is that you can choose between the transient and the tonal part. So your attack or sustain. So I'm finding the fundamental and then finding the octave. And then I'm boosting the transient, so the octave of the transient, not the sustain, just the transient, just the attack. And then what I do is I design that via OXM Spiff. And again, I'll go into OXM Spiff, and it's great because again, you could find those specific frequencies and you've got your cues. And again, I'll just design them and again, make those transients just a little bit more tighter, a little bit more faster. But obviously the issue that you've got when you boost so much transients is that when you then think about the timing of your limiter, those transients are just going to cause your limiter just to kind of bring that down. So you're affecting the time of your limiter. Now, a way of getting around this would be, and this is why I call it push and pull, is that you're bringing up. So again, you're pushing the transients, but you're pulling them down with a clipper. I use a combination, because I've got buses as well, so I'll do clipping on the this kind of transient effect that I've got, and then on the bus, kicks, bus, snare bus, I've then got another clipper. I use Arboreal Pimax, and I also use the TDR Limiter 6, the clipper in there, because the reason I like the TDR Limiter 6 is because I can do a little bit of compression before the clipper, just so the clipper's not doing as much. If this is a bit too brief for you and you want more detail, I've got this on my Patreon page. And if you are a channel member, there'll be a community post, and I've detailed everything like the way that I do it, just in case, because again, I'm trying to make this video kind of quick as I can and as brief as possible. So if you don't understand it, then there is more detail, better explained on my Patreon or if you're a channel member. I've stole this from many, many, many different engineers, and this has been talked about so many times, but it's probably the biggest technique that I've taken that's really, really impacted my mixes for the better, in my opinion. And that is sidechaining. You could do kind of sidechaining in certain ways, but I like to do frequency sidechaining. The kind of, what I call the basic bitch way, sorry, of doing it is basically like you get a compressor and you sidechain the compression. So if it's a kick and a bass, the bass will like duck by 3 dB every time the kick hits. For me, I don't know, I don't really like doing it that way because sometimes it could be audible. And what's great about frequency sidechaining is that, say if it's a bass and a kick and like the kick is making like 100 hertz, that's like its fundamental frequency, right? You think about, well, I don't really want the bass to duck all the time, I just want it to duck 100 hertz. Again, with track spacer and Soothe, you could do that if you set it a certain way. So every time the kick hits, that 100 hertz is brought down in the bass, so the low end of the bass is coming through, but you're not losing the DI kind of mid-range focus or presence of the bass. I do sidechaining quite a lot, and I try not to go overboard with it, but it's hard not to. But I do think it's something that many pro mixers do. I could hear it. I could hear it in their mixes. Now, if you're using track spacer, naturally, like just default, track spacer's quite slow. Now, when you're setting the attack and release times, again, just use your ears. With guitar and snare, I do like to have it really fast, but in terms of my release, I just kind of set that by ear, just because I still want the sustain of the snare still to come through. If you set it too fast, it's just going to kind of be the transient. So you're going to have that transient popping through with the guitars, but you're kind of losing the sustain of the snare, the tail of the snare. So if you play about with your release, you can get it to sound kind of really nice and it come through, pop through. And again, you don't have that kind of audible ducking that you would have with the compression. The biggest kind of impact that I had on me was on vocals. Now what I do is I have an instrument bus. So I send all my instruments to a separate bus. And what I love about using like track spacer on the instrument bus and sidechaining like from the vocals, it means that genuinely the instruments are having to carve like a space for the vocals. And if I hear a lot of pro mixes, especially a lot of Spike Stent stuff, you can hear that the vocals have this space and this priority, and your vocals should always be the priority when you're mixing, especially if you're doing pop stuff. So frequency sidechaining is genuinely something that I think you should try out. There's tools that you could use, track spacers, cheap, and there's a new tool that's came out from mastering the mix called Fuser. What Fuser does is it will listen, well not listen, but it'll look at the frequency clashing, and I'll say, right, okay, this is where the area where you have most frequency clashing, and it will intelligently decide, right, I'll take it out the mid channel or I'll take this out the side channel. So if it's like guitars on a vocal, then normally what you'll find is you just need to take that out the mid channel and leave the side channel unaffected. So the vocals coming through, but you're still getting that width of the guitars. I want to do another maybe 5-6 mixes with it, and then I'll probably do a video on it because I actually do think it's a very cool plugin. Don't be afraid to experiment. Trust your own ears, trust your gut, and do what you like. Don't do something just because other people do it. If something sounds interesting, try it out. And if your gut is telling you that you don't like it, then don't bloody do it. So hopefully this has been of help to you guys. If it's been a help, hit the like button. If you want more kind of this stuff, then click subscribe, because I do want to do more of this stuff and kind of share my journey and kind of talk more about mixing and kind of talk about plugins in a more kind of constructive way and kind of talk about plugins in a way that's actually going to help you. All right. So my name is Paul Third. Like, subscribe, leave a comment, let me know kind of there's any techniques that you've got that's really helped you out as well. Let's just help each other out. My name is Paul Third, and I'll see you again next week.